Sound check presenter's laptop, November 26, 2021. Sound check presenter's laptop. Sound check streaming from clerk's laptop. Sound check clerk's laptop. For sound check clerk's laptop, sound check clerk's laptop. Sound check presenter's laptop, sound check presenter's laptop. We are back.
You're good to go.
Oh, what happened? Everybody's gone. Good morning, everybody. Quorum is now present, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. As a reminder, all electronic devices are to be switched to non-audible function during the committee meeting, and members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. And you may submit another request to speak if that is required or additional time is required. Madam Clerk, good morning. Are there any changes to today's agenda?
Good morning. Yes, Madam Deputy Mayor, through you, we have added consent item 5.1, cycling infrastructure 2022. And we also have the Hamilton Police Services Board report 21098. Their projected capital expenditures for 2022 to 20, I believe it should say 31.
Super, thank you for that. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Vanderbeek, second by Councillor Johnson, sorry. All in favor? And it's electronic vote. Charles is showing a thumbs up as his electronic system is not working. Go.
Perfect. Councillor Whitehead, I don't see here, and Councillor Marula is not here at the moment. Okay. That vote carries 11-0.
Thank you. And now I'm asking everyone, are there any declarations of interest in today's meeting? Councillor Pauls.
And thank you, Chair. Yes, on 7.1, the Hamilton Police Service projected capital expenditure for 2022 to 2031. My son, John Pauls, is a staff sergeant, and I will recuse myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. You'll have that noted, and you will abstain at the appropriate times, Councillor. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a declaration, but I just wanted to let you know that I have a constituent and staff meeting at 10 o'clock that couldn't be scheduled at any other time. So I will leave and I will come back as soon as that meeting is over.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll note that, and hopefully we will continue to have quorum through that time period. Thank you, Councillor. And now we've done that. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of the November 22nd meeting? Moved by Councillor Paul, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Electronic vote, please, everyone.
Thumbs up, Councillor Powers?
Thumbs up for Councillor Powers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That vote carries 11-0.
Thank you. And we're going to move on to item 5, which is consent items. 5.1 is the Cycling Infrastructure 2022, PED 21219, PW 21068, citywide. Can I have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Johnson. It's on the floor. Are there any questions from committee members with regards to Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair Pearson. Before I begin my questions, I would just like to give thanks to Brian and his team. It's been a pleasure working with them, very productive, very professional. So thank you. I appreciate the graph, Chair Pearson, that's on page 4. It depicts the annual cycling investment in Hamilton, and it certainly shows that our investments have been buoyed by senior orders of government recognizing the value of this investment and this infrastructure. Some of my questions might be more appropriate for Mr. Zagarik's portion, so I will take that direction if it's given. If I could ask through you to, I guess, Brian Hollingsworth, our cycling master plan, how far along are we in its completion?
Through the chair, it's Brian Hollingworth, Director of Transportation Planning and Parking. We are well into the cycling master plan, and I'll let Peter Topolovic just give a little bit of a perspective because his team is tracking it project by project. We have that team here, and maybe Peter can just comment on how how we're moving through the cycling master plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Through the chair. So at this point, our cycling master plan has sort of come to a bit of a maturity. It's received a few updates now, and the recent one was with the update to the transportation master plan. In terms of there are a few things with the master plan that are changing. Not only some of the corridors that we had actually, in terms of the corridors we've chosen, we're really I think we've done a good job to follow the master plan and meet the needs in the corridors that were identified. However, in terms of the treatments that we provide through what the master plan was suggesting, uh, the standards have changed over time. The Ontario Traffic Manual, Book 18, has also been updated, which sort of governs what type of infrastructure we would be implementing. And so, and not to mention our complete street guidelines, which are being created and coming to council rather soon in next year, are changing the way the type of infrastructure that we'd be implementing. For example, instead of painted lanes, we might be putting separated facilities, as you've seen in some of our recent implementations. So, I think what we have is a really good blueprint of what corridors we should be choosing. And what the good part of the master plan, I think, is that it allowed us to sort of be able to upgrade our standards and keep our similar corridors. In terms of what we've done, I think that we've probably, in terms of what the master plan envisioned, we might be not reaching our targets as fast as we had probably envisioned from the first master plan. But we have been making a lot of progress in recent years to not only add in the sort of new corridors that were identified in the master plan, but also to upgrade some of the corridors that needed a higher standard. And I think you've seen that a lot, especially in the last 3 years.
Through Chair Pearson, thank you very much, Peter. That makes sense to me. That line, when you know better, you do better. And those are being influenced by the adjustments in as we apply them to cycling infrastructure. But I just further to my question though, how close are we to the completion of the overall master plan? I'm still not clear on that. And if that is no longer a relevant question because of those new standards, I can understand that as well, but still not clear.
Through the chair, I think the last part that you mentioned, Councillor Wilson, is that things have changed a fair bit in terms of the standards we would apply, and I think that while the master plan again has really laid out the right corridors, so we could talk about in terms of the corridors that we've filled versus the type of infrastructure we're building, and I don't have the percentage complete in front of me, but I think we're nearing to the end of what the master plan has identified. Sort of at the we really surpassed sort of what we thought the 50% mark would be, but I don't think we're near to the 100%. And I'm sure that my team might and we could go back as well and look at the exact percentage complete. But and I think Daryl's here as well on the call, but if I'm wrong, but we're at the 60 +% mark, and I don't think we've been looking at much of percentage, but more on corridors and the type of infrastructure that we're building. And we're also scheduled to update this master plan in the next 2 years, and integrate that with perhaps our other plans, and I think that will give us a better idea of where we really are in terms of progress, and also give us a better idea of where we are in terms of standards, because we've updated a lot. So I think that we have that on track to make that update. I think that's a better time at which we could really exactly show how much infrastructure we have built and where we're headed and what that percentage is. I think it's not the easiest to quantify, but we're certainly progressing towards meeting the sort of 3/4 mark of the master plan.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll skip my second question through the chair to either Peter or Brian, because you've just referenced my third question in terms of the changing context and priority. So if I could give one example, and I'm wondering whether your answer will be, we're going to be providing for that in what you just referenced, our renewal of the cycling master plan or the transportation master plan. So on Monday, for example, this coming Monday, the truck route subcommittee is going to be meeting. Here's just an example of a factor. And my question is, how are we accounting for that in our planning and in our future budget? In that report, it does acknowledge that for those routes that are selected for trucks, there would be an inherent conflict between the most vulnerable user and the truck, for example. And then it states where trucks and vulnerable road users share the road, there is a need for appropriately protective design of the road corridors for pedestrians, cyclists, for example, physical barriers for bike lanes, separation for sidewalks, large trucks in the middle lane. So how are we planning for that in terms of your work plan and our what I would anticipate to be an expressed budget need? Through the chair.
Through the chair, it's Brian Hollingworth here again, and we'll have more commentary on this Monday as part of the truck route master plan review. But we are taking a very close look at some of those corridors where it's just impossible not to have trucks on a major commercial corridor and also achieve our vision for safe cycling facilities. Rymo Road is one example where those trade-offs need to be made. We're making those trade-offs through our Complete Streets project, but also anticipating a lot more separated facilities, multi-use paths, cycle tracks, protected facilities, and we're starting to build those into our budgets, and that's in part a little bit why you see the cycling budget increasing year to year.
Thank you. So my last question then is back to the budget. I think the report says that we spend $3.2 million on cycling infrastructure. The dark bars in your table, Brian, on figure 1 show an incremental increase. Has there been any direction given by this council for a proportionate increase in keeping with those said policy drivers, such as the downtown secondary plan, where there was an expressed understanding that as a consequence of reduced parking requirements, we're going to invest in pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, and with respect to the truck route subcommittee work, and with respect to climate change. I'm wondering how that is going to be reflected in our budget, and whether maybe this is a more appropriate question to Mr. Zagaric, whether that direction or conversation has to be had in the next segment of today.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, I'll just start out, and I will also point that in addition to Peter's team, we have Mike Field's team and Edward Soldo, Chief Road Official, who we very much work with to help establish priorities, because we're all looking at one piece of infrastructure, and we, either directly or implied in the various master plans that council has approved, including, for example, the parking master plan, which speaks to a better alignment with sustainable mobility and active transportation, our complete streets policies. I think we have sufficient direction from this council to continue striving for better active transportation and cycling facilities. You see the continued increase in investments, but we don't have an explicit target, for example.
Okay, thank you, Brian. That will be my question then for Mr. Zagaric when we get to that item further along on the agenda. Thank you again for your team and your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I now have Mr. Mayor and then Councillor Clark and myself. Unless somebody else comes in, I'll go last. Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, and much appreciated the work and effort going into cycling in our community. So, as of this year, some $5.5 million has been spent on adding safe biking lanes in our community. Is that what I'm reading in our graph here? That's for this year?
Through the chair, that's correct, yes.
which I think is certainly up from previous years, or actually up quite significantly if we look at 2018, where it was a grand total of $1.3 million. We're now at 5.6, and more resources coming from specifically our federal partners in terms of active transportation, investments that they're making. So I'm quite happy with that. And when I look at the list of projects happening throughout all the various wards, a lot of them predominantly lower city, but certainly throughout the city, it's definitely a work in progress, and I'm quite impressed with the ones that are in design phase. So having said that, the one area that I will be bringing a motion on, which is directly related to cycling, is the sustainability of our SoBi bike program in our community. And right now, it isn't at all sustainable, and I think we need to find the partnership ways to kind of bring it to sustainability and allow it to expand to other areas of the city beyond that. So just a quick note, it's cycling related, not infrastructure related in the direct sense. But Peter, thoughts on where we are with SoBi bike and what we, in my view, should be doing in terms of looking at providing resources to make the SoBi bike sustainable going forward.
To the chair, yeah. So in terms of where we're at with I guess last time we came to council, it was sort of our emergency operations of the bike share program, and I know that we'll be coming. We have other. We're on track to sort of update council in the next year as well, but the program has been operating definitely in emergency mode, and there's been good success with keeping the system going. But as we stated in other previous reports, that type of operating mode isn't really there to build ridership or to expand the system in any way, shape, or form. It really is just to make sure it continues its operations until we can continue with a more fulsome plan, which we're still working on. So I think that just like any other city who has a bike share program, generally these programs, to continue in the long term as public transit, they do need, there's a variety of different ways in which they could get sort of financial support, but they operate very similar to public transit. And so generally speaking, they need some type of subsidy, which we've talked about previously, which is either from the private sector, the public sector, grants, user fees, and things in between. So you can generate revenue in a variety of different ways, which programs have done, similar to public transit. So I would say in terms of sustainability, you are correct that we're not necessarily running the system right now for sustainability, but rather in its emergency mode, which it has been running, I would say, quite successfully from that perspective. We're providing the service in the service area with the number of bikes that we have, and we are making upgrades to some of the stations and also some of the bikes to make sure that they can continue operating. But that we don't yet have plans for expanding that service or enhancing it beyond what we've already done.
Thank you, Peter. And certainly that's an area that I have significant concern over. I don't want to be in a position where, every other year we're maintaining an emergency system where we have to scramble to get funds from private sector or otherwise to keep it going on a kind of a Band-Aid basis. So it has become an integral part of our transportation network. And should be, and rightfully so. And the amount of users that have gone through the system has been dramatically high, and so it's popular and certainly is of benefit when we think about issues like climate change, the CO2 emissions, and what bikes don't do, which obviously emit anything. It is something that we ought to embrace as part of our overall transportation network. So I will be bringing forward a motion asking for stronger direction around sustainable funding for SOBI, or the social bike program, bike share program, that certainly will continue to look for sponsors, and that's not to negate that effort. But I think there's got to be a need for this municipality to take a share of the operating costs to ensure that this can be maintained sustainably and effectively as part of our overall mobile transportation network. So Peter, thank you for that. And I'm quite impressed with the long list of projects that are proposed for cycling lanes in our community. And I think we need to keep that drive going and continue to tap into both the Green Energy Fund that the FCM has available for transportation, especially low energy, low cost, low emissions transportation. And I know the federal government continues to focus on that as well. So if we can cobble together even more resources to provide even more lanes for our community, that would be a positive thing. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Peter, for all your great work. And I look forward to more and more investments in this cycling space. I think it's important for our community. It's certainly going to provide benefit, and I know the community at large appreciates it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Clark, please.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor. I'd like to refer the staff to page 6 in the report, and it speaks to the projects that are going to be installed, and one of them is Stone Church Road, Ward 6 and 9. And it shows Arbor Street to the Upper Red Hill Valley Parkway, a multi-use path, which I fully support. I'm wondering if staff have given their mind to how that multi-use pathway is going to connect to Stone Church and Paramount. We have bike lanes in the road right now, but there's no separator. They're vulnerable. And then on that street, there's an awful lot of trucks coming and going every day.
Through the chair, it's Brian. I'll turn that over to Peter, and Mike Field's team can also speak to that.
Thank you, sir.
Through the chair. So as part of the project, we're going to move into detailed design phase here. Part of the idea is that the multi-use path will take on more of the cyclists who feel uncomfortable cycling on the road as sort of the primary way that they would get around. But also as part of the project, we're going to be looking at the corridor itself and doing a detailed design, and then following up with the councillors in which the board passes through, of course, including Councillor Clark, to make sure that the solution is meeting the needs of all types of cyclists and pedestrians.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor, if I can turn to, I'm sorry, I'm still on page 6. It's now on table 3, just below where we were before. So we have a number of projects in Ward 9, the Mud Street, Highland Road, and Highland Road. I support all of the projects. The Mud Street one, the multi-use path that they're referencing, it is going to be separate from Mud Street itself.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. No, that's excellent, because again, that street has a tremendous amount of trucks on it every day. Very busy street, and it's good that it's going to be separated from that street. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the work that you're doing for my ward and the city. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. And if I can relinquish the chair to the mayor, I do just have a couple of questions. Excellent report, and thank everybody involved, Brian and Peter. Just my questions were, and I noticed that we're proposing a small section of a dedicated bike lane on King Street between Stony Brook and Highway number 8. So there is no other bike lane in that stretch, and we're just kind of putting it in the middle. Is that how staff foresee having access along King Street? There is bike lanes on King. There is a bike lane on King Street in the downtown core.
Through the chair, the corridor has been identified in the cycling master plan, but there are planned works here, and so this would be that next segment to build. but it will be a sort of a segment that is standalone until we do further works in the future. But the plan is for connectivity through where the master plan identified.
Okay, and I believe there might be some works proposed for the west of that from Grays Road coming east, but I will check that in the capital books. And I appreciate that clarification. And I know, Peter, I think we've talked about it, or it's been Daryl, with regards to the bi-directional bike lane that's being worked on for highway number 8 from King Street to DeWitt Road. Is that still the intent that that goes on the very large shoulder that's on highway number 8?
Through the chair, I'm hoping I'm thinking about the same segment you are, but I believe so. Although there's if that's the area where the active EA is, then I think that's still a potential for discussion.
Okay, no, this is west of the EA. This is, I believe, where Highway 8 and King Street intersect. There's very, very large boulevards and then the sidewalks separate from the road. And that's the discussions I had with, I think, Daryl some time ago, that that's a perfect area to start addressing and putting a bike path in. A bi-directional could work.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, so we'll just keep that on the radar. And Peter, I know we've talked, how about the bike lane on DeWitt Road from number 8 to Barton? That's being resurfaced next year. And you and I have discussed putting in a bike lane on the DeWitt, on that stretch. And I don't see it in the budget though.
Through the chair, it was an identified project in 2021. That's why it's not on the 2022 list. So that's that's in partnership with engineering services, and that's on its way to implementation. That's why it's not on the 2022 list.
Perfect. And I know it was delayed for this year because of the intensification of a development on the south side of highway number 8 and infrastructure works that had to be done on DeWitt Road to accommodate that construction. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. I don't see any further speakers. So with that, we did have a mover and a seconder. Can I please ask for a recorded vote then? All in favor? Thank you, guys.
Madam Chair, while you're waiting, I did have a motion I wanted to put forward relative to cycling in our community. Did you want me to wait until motions, or do you want me to do that now?
I think, if Madam Clerk can clarify, I think it would be appropriate to do it now, but we'll just wait for this vote to be completed. And I see Councillor Powers.
I've got your thumb. I'm just waiting for Councillor Marula. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Madam Chair, Madam Clerk, I don't have the vote before me. However, I am logged in, so I might have to re-log in.
No problem. Thumbs up. Thank you.
Support. Thank you.
And yes, Mr. Mayor, your vote is ready to go. So whenever you want to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll turn to you for a motion.
Thank you. And the motion would read, and I'm just wondering if it should come back to GIC or through the budget process, but the staff be directed to report back to GIC with options to efficiently and effectively provide financial sustainability for social bike program in the city of Hamilton for the 2022 budget deliberations. And if I could get a seconder for that. Thank you.
I saw Councillor Marula seconding it.
Much appreciated. I anything to, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I've already spoken to it. I think there's a need to look to see how we can make this happen on a longer term basis rather than on a year-to-year Band-Aid basis. So I'm hoping we can get a sense from our staff as to what that might take. Also, always in concert with private sector contributions and promotions and advertising and all the things that they're already doing. But even so, that doesn't allow for either current operations to be sustainable or expansion, which I think everyone's looking for in other parts of our city. So I think this is going to be an important part of our transportation network going into the future. And it certainly requires us to have a hard look at what makes it sustainable and effective and efficient for all of our citizens going forward. So I would appreciate support for this and look forward to a report back to GIC.
So it's been moved and seconded appropriately. Any questions to the motion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a recorded vote, please.
Got your thumb, Councillor Powers?
Thank you, Madam
Councillor
Chair.
Marula?
Appreciate
Councillor Marula, thumb or voted? Okay.
Councillor Ferguson, are you still with us?
Yep, the vote hasn't come up yet. It took quite a while last time too.
Okay. I want to try F5. Are you in favor or opposed? And I can mark
I'm
you.
in favor.
Thank you, sir. Vote carries 12-0.
Super. Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on now to staff presentation. 6.1 is the 2022 tax supported capital budget FCS 21096 citywide. And I'm going to welcome Mike Zagier that's going to provide the presentation to us. And it's also included on the agenda today. Good morning, Mike. Where's the bike?
Good Friday morning, Madam Deputy Mayor, Mike Zagier, General Manager of Finance Corporate Services. I'm in our traditional work environment today, so no bike in the background today. But if you can see over my left shoulder, a empty candy machine, dispensing machine. So in the future, I'll make sure that that's filled.
Does that mean it's going to be a short presentation, Mike? Thank you.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, there are a number of slides, so I'll take the lead of committee as to whether or not you would like to ask questions as I present the slides, or if you would prefer to wait to the end of the presentation.
Okay, and what would these, I'm going to suggest that we wait till the end of the, how many slides are there again, Mike? Sorry, I lost.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I have to admit I haven't counted how many slides, but I'm going to assume around 40 slides.
I think we'll
39.
wait. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Stephanie. I think we'll wait to the end if that's okay. And the speakers list has been activated on the chat. So go ahead, Mike. That way we don't disrupt your chain of thought.
Great. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So we've anchored Committee's week this week on budget deliberations. He started the week with the rate supported budget, and today it's my privilege to present the 2022 preliminary tax capital supported budget. I just want to recognize and thank senior leadership team, their leadership teams for their efforts in compiling the preliminary tax supported capital budget that's before committee for consideration. I appreciate and recognize all the competing demands on staff, but again, I just want to recognize and thank staff and senior leadership team for their attention and dedication towards the budget process. Purpose for today is to provide a summary with respect to the preliminary 2022 tax supported capital budget, as well as just reminding committee and the community that the city does support multi-year budgeting. And so we have a bit of a summary with respect to the 2023 to 2025 tax capital forecasts. And as committee members have likely already noticed, staff are available to answer any questions committee members might have with respect to the budget in general or any of the specific capital projects that are before you for deliberation and consideration. You may note through the tax capital documents that have been presented to you, the staff report, as well as what was already referred to this morning, the two capital budget books, is that the 2022 to 2025 capital financing plan continues to focus on some consistent objectives. Committee members will recognize that the tax capital budget principally supports the rehabilitation of existing assets. But in addition to maintaining existing assets, there are some identified funds towards responding to the need for supporting economic recovery in response to the current COVID pandemic. As well, the capital financing forecast does benefit from leveraging funding from senior levels of government. And I do want to recognize both senior levels of government. Not only have they assisted Ontario municipalities as it relates to mitigating the COVID impacts and the financial impacts that municipalities are facing. But as well, there are significant investments being made from senior levels of government across Ontario, as well as locally, as it relates to capital and infrastructure requirements. The financing plan as well continues to apply some attention towards the support for transportation and housing priorities, and I'll speak to each of these through my presentation. And finally, the financing strategy supports integrated growth and development, as well as a series of other 2016 to 2025 strategic plan priorities and priorities of this term of council. What is before you for deliberation and consideration is an additional $4.8 million ask, which represents approximately a 0.5% capital levy increase towards maintaining and rehabilitating existing assets, often referred to as state of good repair. In addition to the $4.8 million ask towards state of good repair, staff are recommending an additional 0.15% capital levy increase towards the city's commitments as it relates to investing in Canada Infrastructure Plan transit priorities, as well as the continued investment towards West Harbour to prepare that site for development and redevelopment. Also, I just want to highlight that the 2023 to 2025 forecast makes some adjustments with respect to inflation, principally as it relates to the block allocations. And for the benefit of the community, the City of Hamilton, for the purpose of multi-year project management, has a block allocation process with respect to the tax capital budget. In that, program areas are assigned a funding envelope and they plan accordingly over the 4-year multi-year forecast. What is before you for approval in principle is to adjust those block allocations for the inflationary pressures that those programs are facing. And so again, as it relates to the 23 to 25 forecast, the 0.5% capital levy increase, staff are recommending to be applied to the blocks according to an inflationary forecast. The 2022 to 25 capital financing plan also initiates a multi-year financing strategy to address our $54 million funding shortfall for discretionary development charge exemptions. These are development charge exemptions whereby across all sectors, whereby City Council has approved facilitating and incentivizing development across the city. And again, these apply to not only geographic, but to sectoral development charge exemptions. And again, it is a multi-year financing strategy, and staff are initiating or recommending initiating that multi-year financing strategy in 2022. As well, the financing strategy that is before you for deliberation and consideration continues to support the city's AA+ credit rating, which identifies or suggests that city are mindful of the debt policy that council has approved, as well as needing to ensure liquidity through reserves and transfers to and from reserves. So again, what is presented before you sets out to maintain and support the city's current AA+ credit rating. As I've mentioned this morning, the city's 2022 capital forecast principally addresses rehabilitation of existing assets. And just as a reminder to committee and to the community, is that municipalities of all public sectors, municipalities are accountable for the majority of infrastructure, public infrastructure. In fact, municipalities across Canada are accountable for approximately 65% of all public infrastructure. In the case of Hamilton, if the City of Hamilton were to, and again, this is just for illustrative purposes, were to need to replace all of our existing infrastructure, that would represent a $20 billion necessary investment. And that represents both the rate supported program, water, wastewater, and storm, as well as the tax supported program. Today, committee is focused on the tax supported program, and you can see the weighting between those two programs is generally equal as it relates to the $20 billion valuation. And again, the purpose for today is to focus on our tax supported program. Staying in the theme of asset rehabilitation and the requirement for municipalities to address asset rehabilitation, is just a reminder that City Council has approved a asset management policy as required under legislation and regulation by the province of Ontario. Staff and committee and council has some heavy lifting to do over the next 8 months, and that the next deadline as it relates to this process requires council to approve levels of service as it relates to our core assets, what's identified by the province as core assets, which includes roads, bridges, water, wastewater, and stormwater. Following the requirements of July 1st, 2022, is municipal councils in Ontario will be required to undertake a similar process as it relates to the remaining assets that municipalities are responsible for. And finally, on July 1st of 2025, the levels of service will need to be completed, and the appropriate costing will have to be presented to council not only in 2025, but subsequently through the budget processes. So in part, recognizing this requirement, as I mentioned previously, staff are recommending adjusting our blocks, our capital blocks, in recognition that we will be undertaking some work in 2022, which will likely identify the need to focus some of our financial resources to the continued work around the rehabilitation of existing assets. So again, the purpose of this slide is just to remind committee members and the community that the city will be embarking on the continued work around asset management in 2022, and we'll have to complete some initial work around core assets by the summer of 2022, followed by some additional work in the summer of 2024. The 2022 capital, tax-supported capital budget represents a forecast investment of approximately $386 million. This is compared to 2021's approved capital supported program of $484.4 million. That was subsequently revised because of some funding from senior levels of government, as well as some additional in-year approvals by council in 2021 to a revised total investment of just short of $540 million. The 2022 tax supported capital budget is not is principally consistent with what was presented to committee and council in 2021 as we are forecasting for 2022. The differences as it relates to what's before you today for consideration versus what committee and council approved in principle last year represents a change of approximately $2.5 million. And I'll just go through some of those factors that are contributing to that $2.5 million change. The Mount Hope Library expansion is being deferred to 2023 from 2022, and that represents a deferral of approximately $2.6 million. The National Housing Strategy Co-Investment Fund, as we move towards executing the agreement with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, city staff have a better appreciation that the city's investment is of an operating nature, not of a capital nature, and therefore the investment is not changing, but where it's being reflected is changing. So you will see the city's investment through the National Housing Strategy Co-Investment Fund reflected in the 2022 operating budget versus the 2022 capital budget. The Birch Avenue Bridge, which was one of the projects that the city committed under the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program transit stream, requires an additional $2.4 million in investment, and staff are recommending supporting that investment through debt financing. As well, the Stadium Precinct Park is requiring an increase of additional $1.3 million of investment, and staff similarly are recommending that the $1.3 million be supported through additional debt. And finally, there are approximately $2.4 million in additional investments to be funded from reserves. The $2.4 million makes up approximately $970,000 of investment from our investment stabilization reserve to fund the Albion Falls Waterfalls viewing project. Just a reminder to committee that the requirement of this reserve funding is really subject to the city's application under the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund. This project was one of the projects that were submitted by the city. So again, the requirement from reserve would be subject to an approval as it relates to the city submission. And the balance of the $2.4 million is approximately $1.5 million towards the life cycle replacement for some composting related equipment, as well as waste collection fleet replacement. So again, the 2022 tax supported capital budget is principally the same as what was presented last year to committee, with some minor adjustments as highlighted on this slide. As I mentioned through the summary slides, is the 2022 capital budget strives to leverage funding from senior levels of government. And again, I thought it was important for committee and for the community to recognize that over and above what staff are presenting as a preliminary capital investment through the tax supported program and what was already approved by council earlier this week as it relates to the rate supported program, there have been significant investments by senior levels of government towards infrastructure requirements in the city of Hamilton. And this list is intended just to provide a summary of those investments that are already approved or are pending. As it relates to those investments already approved, you can see that they represent approximately $3.8 billion of investments. This includes the $3.4 billion commitment for LRT, as well as $370 million towards the transit stream under the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. I should note that the $370 million is only a portion of the 10-year commitment. The overall 10-year commitment, including the city's contribution, represents just in excess of $500 million. As well as under the ISIP programs, under the Community Culture and Recreation stream, approximately $9 million of investments. And again, the listing of projects can be found on table 7.2 of the report. As well as under the resilience stream, an additional $7 million of local investments. And again, this is federal and provincial funding, and those projects can be found under table 7.3. The federal gas tax and what was subsequently announced in 2021 was a one-time doubling of the federal gas tax under a program that was renamed, given the one-time nature of the commitment, as the Canada Community Building Fund. The City of Hamilton was a recipient of an additional $32.7 million in 2021, and City Council has approved prioritizing $30 million of the $32.7 million towards minor maintenance projects within each of the wards. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, our Rapid Housing Initiative, the federal government's Rapid Housing Initiative, that was an additional $12.9 million. And I should note that was over and above what was announced, I believe $10.8 million in 2020. So for a total of approximately $24 million in rapid housing initiatives intended to provide permanent and affordable housing, approximately 93 units in the city of Hamilton. Green and Inclusive Community Building Program, additional $1.2 million, and finally, Canada Healthy Communities Initiative, approximately $300,000. So just wanting to recognize the support, financial support from senior levels of government of approximately $3.8 billion. There are two intake programs that the city has submitted for some financial support from senior levels of government that we are still awaiting a determination of the application. Those two programs are the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. The ask was approximately $41 million in federal support. And finally, the Canada Community Revitalization Fund, an additional $5.5 million of support that we are seeking. So what is before committee for your deliberations and consideration is a recommended increase of approximately just short of $6.2 million in additional funding. You'll see that the debt portion of that represents approximately 0.2% change, increase in debt. Transfer from operating effectively is funding from the levy, from the tax revenue through the levy, and that represents a increase of approximately $6.1 million or 7.1%. So again, what is before committee for your deliberations is a capital levy increase of approximately 0.65%, which would represent a increase for an average residential property of approximately $28. You'll see that that $28 is based on a average household assessment of $381,000. Just a reminder to committee and to the community that the province through MPAC has deferred the reassessment period, so we continue to rely on property valuations as of January 1st, 2016. So relying on January 1st, 2016 valuations, again, an average property in the city of Hamilton has a valuation of $381,000. You can see the breakdown of the $28.30 average impact of the 0.65% increase. The approximately half of it, approximately $22, is targeted towards rehabilitation of existing assets, described here as our discretionary capital blocks. Additional just short of $5 or 0.11% towards the city's obligations under the transit ISIP stream. And finally, just short of $2, $1.74 towards our continued development and investment strategy as it relates to West Harbour. So again, if committee and council were to approve the capital budget that is before you today, recommending a 0.65% capital levy increase, that would represent an increase of approximately $28.32 for an average household. As it relates to the $386 million preliminary capital budget, you can see that the majority, again, of the investment, approximately 70% or $270 million, is being recommended towards maintaining and rehabilitating our existing assets. Approximately 30% or $116 million would be invested towards facilitating growth and meeting the city's obligations as it relates to our growth forecasts and in order for us to support our economic development strategy. As it relates to how how staff are recommending to fund the $386 million preliminary forecast, I'll just work from the top right of this graphic. Is the majority of the funding would come from operating. Approximately $93 million or 24% of the financing strategy would be funded pay as you go or from the operating budget. Working from right to left, further down on the right, you'll see approximately $86 million of reserves and other internal funding. Again, this represents reserves as well as, I believe, approximately $16 million in surplus funds of capital projects that were previously approved where those projects again had either a surplus or no longer proceeding. And so again, what we refer to as WIPs, approximately $16 million in WIP funding, as well as some dividends as it relates to electric utilities, in part towards our poverty strategy, as well as towards rehabilitation of existing assets. I mentioned previously the growth related component of our 2022 tax capital budget. The city recovers some of the costs related to growth through development charges, and you can see a forecasted reliance of approximately $82 million of development charge revenues. That represents 21% of our financing strategy. Subsidy and other revenue represents just short of $60 million or 16%. The federal gas tax, we're relying on $34 million of the federal gas tax revenue. Just as a reminder to committee, the one-time funding of federal gas tax, the doubling, was committed in 2021 and approved in 2021. That was one of the 2021 in-year adjustments that amended the 2021 capital budget. And finally, debt is one of those tools, revenue tools, that municipalities rely on as it relates to infrastructure, and debt would represent approximately $32 million of our 2022 capital financing plan, or approximately 8%. Just wanting to highlight some of the program areas that staff are recommending the 2022 capital gross investment of $386 million being allocated to. Roads, bridges, sidewalks, street lighting, staff are recommending $130 million towards this program area. Transit initiatives, approximately $77 million. Energy, fleet and facilities, approximately $60 million. Environmental services, approximately $39 million. West Harbor initiatives, approximately $20 million. A series of other smaller initiatives totaling $13 million. Planning, economic development, tourism and culture, $13 million. Fire and paramedic services, $10 million. Waste management, $9 million. Outside boards and agencies, $6.3 million. Affordable housing initiatives, $3.5 million, and information technology, $3.5 million, for a total again of $386 million. I'll just take a few minutes to highlight some of the projects under each one of these program areas. As mentioned, staff are recommending approximately $130 million of gross investments towards roads, bridges, traffic. Approximately $75 million of the $130 million would be targeted towards maintaining and rehabilitating existing assets. The balance, approximately $55 million, is required in order to help to facilitate growth. Of the $75 million of investments, again, they would be targeted towards roads that may be currently in that poor index as it relates to quality, as well as a series of roads that are currently within that fair condition assessment. The growth-related projects include projects in Waterdown, the Burlington Road upgrades, the East-West Road Corridor, which is referred to as the Waterdown Bypass, Binbrook Road, Binhaven to Fletcher, South Coast 20 Road Extension, again, South Coast and Irvin Avenue. Again, these are projects required in order to facilitate our growth requirements and growth forecasts. With respect to transit initiatives, what is before committee for your consideration is approximately $77 million in total dollar investment for transit. This includes, as it relates to the city's 10-year transit strategy and our maintenance and storage facility, which was approved in previous years, $40 million towards the Birch Avenue Bridge and roadworks, and this is in order to support the maintenance and storage facility. Additional $19 million for bus replacement programs, and that represents approximately the acquisition of 18 buses. Additional $7 million to improve the city's modal split, and that represents 9 additional buses. And finally, $4 million towards the transit expansion program, and that represents approximately 5 additional buses. In addition to the Birch Avenue Bridge project and the additional rolling fleet or buses, there's an additional $3 million for real-time operations maintenance, as well as $2 million for A-line priority bus corridor investment. You can see as it relates to the multi-year 2022 to 2031 transit initiatives, a total of approximately $322 million of additional investments as it relates to the transit program, and supporting the transit program should identify that the $322 million represents the additional investments over this period and represents, again, a portion of the just over $500 million that has been approved by council as well as by senior levels of government through the ISIP transit program. Staff are recommending additional $19.8 million of investment in the West Harbour district, approximately $6 million for Pier 5 through 7 Boardwalk, as well as a $6 million obligation the city has to replace the police marine facility, approximately $3 million for the Macassa Bay shoreline improvement, and finally $3 million for the Macassa Bay boardwalk and trail. And should just wanting to also identify that over and above the $20 million council has approved to date, approximately $120 million towards the West Harbour improvements, with a forecasted $40 million post 2022. Again, the West Harbour redevelopment is expected to contribute approximately 1,300 to approximately 1,600 new residential units and about 120,000 additional square meters of additional residential space and approximately 6,400 square meters of additional commercial space, expected to contribute a full build out approximately $8 to $9 million annually in additional municipal taxes. So again, for 2022, an additional investment just short of $20 million. As it relates to development charges, we are relying on approximately $81.5 million of the development charge revenues that we would draw from the reserves. These funds would go towards the road, bridges, sidewalks, street lighting, as well as energy fleet facilities, environmental services, planning, economic development, tourism, culture, waterfront development, transit initiatives, boards and agencies, and finally our waste program. Some of those growth-related projects include $10 million towards the Waterdown Burlington Road upgrade, $10 million towards the East-West Road corridor, also referred to as Waterdown Bypass, approximately $23 million towards Brightside Park, Stadium Precinct Community, approximately $24 million towards Macassa Lodge, D-Wing, and this represents 20 new beds, as well as the movement of 44 beds from D-Wing, which were in shared accommodations, to private accommodations. I just want to draw on some external information through the University of Toronto, the Urban Policy Lab, and the Institute of Municipal Finance and Governance. And the purpose for this graphic is to highlight the relationship from all three levels of government as it relates to municipal infrastructure. And what you might have recognized through today's presentation is that the City of Hamilton is and municipalities in Ontario are principally responsible for the funding of municipal services such as fire, parks and recreation, library and culture, police, wastewater, water, solid waste, roads, transit, and social housing. And again, this graphic is based on the financial information returns that all 444 municipalities provide to the province of Ontario. And the reason I wanted to share this graphic with you is not only to highlight the continued reliance on municipalities' own source revenues as it relates to those programs that I've just read off, but as it relates to social programs, including health programs, as you can see, the relationship varies with senior levels of government. As it relates to paramedic services, we're not quite there in terms across the province, but closer. It's in the case of the City of Hamilton towards 50-50 contribution or financial burden between the province and the City of Hamilton. Long-term care, again, similarly, a split responsibility from as it relates to the province and City of Hamilton. Public health is, again, that relationship is changing, and you'll see that through our 2022 operating budget, where as it relates to public health and child care, is this provincial government is looking to leverage more financial contribution from municipalities. And finally, social assistance is the city municipalities continue to contribute a share of the cost of social assistance programs. So again, just wanting to highlight as it relates to health and social assistance programs, what you'll see is no consistency across those programs. There isn't a common methodology as to the apportionment of financial burden between the province and the municipalities. And just recognizing that this has taken a series of iterations over the decades, and the province has worked with AMO and the City of Toronto in looking at the appropriate way to fund programs, more specifically health and social assistance programs, is that there has not been considerable movement in terms of that earlier work as it relates to a fair distribution of costs between the province and municipalities. As well, housing has been a priority of the City Council and prior municipal councils, and continues to be a priority in this community. And just wanting to highlight the relationship in terms of municipal, federal, and provincial. So just working through this table is just a reminder that previous council approved a $50 million contribution towards poverty reduction, and that was funded through deferring some repayments to future fund, as well as some dividend uplift from our electric utility. Again, City Council previously approved $20 million of investment towards the reduction, towards affordable rental housing. Those funds were exhausted in 2021, and again, there are no additional commitments as it relates to this particular stream in 2022 or beyond. As well as part of that $50 million was towards the funding for Indigenous poverty reduction. And we continue to have a commitment of $1 million each year in the years of 2022 to 2025. The social housing repair renovation, pre-2022, a $8 million commitment, and we continue to reflect a $2 million commitment each of the years 2022 to 2025. Just wanting to highlight for the attention of committee is that $50 million commitment unfortunately did not leverage any matching funding from senior levels of government. So again, while local taxpayers made that $50 million commitment, we weren't able to leverage any matching funding or from senior levels of government. In addition to the $50 million, is council has approved a construction loan of approximately $29 million towards the Roxborough redevelopment, as well as just in excess of a $9 million loan to City Housing Hamilton as it relates to the McNabb rehabilitation. We've spoken somewhat to the Rapid Housing Initiative, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And again, that represents a $23.7 million investment. You'll see down below as it relates to the strategy co-investment fund is City Housing Hamilton. We're reflecting a $4.3 million investment pre-2022 with an additional $4.8 million in 2022. I think important to highlight for committee and for the community is these dollars identified, and you can see the total on the far right of $23.8 million for the period 2026 to 2031 are dollars that are effectively freed up as mortgages related to housing units that might have been developed during the 1960s to 1990s or coming end of term. Council had the opportunity to apply those freed up tax dollars towards other priorities, towards tax reduction, or towards social housing. And council approved directing $23.8 million over this time period to City Housing Hamilton towards the rehabilitation of City Housing Hamilton properties. In addition, City of Hamilton is providing a loan to City Housing Hamilton as it relates to the co-investment fund, and the loans as it relates to the co-investment fund represent both forgivable and repayable loans. So just wanting to highlight some of the historical and some of the forecasted investments as it relates to social and affordable housing. And just wanting to continue to draw on the need for continued investment from senior levels of government is just wanting to use the example of the co-investment fund to illustrate the continued reliance on municipalities as it relates to social housing and affordable housing. Just as a reminder, you may recall the announcement of $194 million between City of Hamilton, City Housing Hamilton, and Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Of that $194 million, the City of Hamilton's contribution is about 70% of that $194 million. The balance is a federal contribution through Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. I've spoken to the $48 million effectively that City Housing Hamilton is responsible for, that effectively is housing services savings over this time period as it relates to mortgages that are coming into term. In addition, City Housing Hamilton and the City of Hamilton as a sole shareholder is responsible for a loan repayment of approximately $87.4 million, an interest-bearing loan repayment of approximately $87.4 million. So again, just wanting to highlight the need for additional funding from senior levels of government as it relates to affordable housing and social housing, and the fact that municipalities tend to be a significant financial contributor as it relates to social and affordable housing. And finally, as a reminder, is that in the province of Ontario, municipalities, again, Ontario is the only jurisdiction in North America that relies on property taxes as it relates to the funding of social and affordable housing. Committee would have seen this chart in previous years, and we just want to again highlight for the benefit of committee and community the forecasted investment from all three levels of government towards housing investment, and this represents both capital and operating. And so, as you can see, the darker shaded blue represents municipal contribution, the province in that lighter shade of blue, and finally the federal contribution in gray. And you can see that the municipal contribution has been relatively consistent and is expected to grow in 2022, 23, and 24. But at this time, we haven't commitments from senior levels of government to the same magnitude the city has committed to in those periods 2022 to 24. So hoping that senior levels of government participate at a similar rate that municipalities are as it relates to housing investments, and that would represent a significant benefit to our community as it relates to the stock and the quality of stock in social and affordable housing. Just wanting to spend a few minutes on our debt forecast, and this is somewhat similar, a bit of a repeat of what Director Mcmullen presented to committee on Monday through the rate supported budget. So you will see that total forecast is expected to grow over the period 2022 to 2031. Again, staff are ensuring that we maintain our debt forecasts over this period in general as it relates to Council's tax policies. One of the driving factors to the debt forecast you can see is the rate supported program, and more specifically some of the growth related projects within our rate supported program, which represents water, wastewater, and storm. As it relates to the debt charges, you can see that the province of Ontario determines a debt ceiling for municipalities. In the case of the City of Hamilton, that debt ceiling is identified by the province at $220 million as it relates to our debt charges, annual debt charges. Again, we are far below that provincial debt ceiling. And I would say that the majority of municipalities, with the exception of maybe one or two that are going through some extraordinary growth, are well below the ARL debt ceiling set by the province. The graph before you now reflects our forecast as it relates to tax and rate supported debt charges relative to Council's policy, debt policy. And you can see that while there are periods that we are slightly above, Council's set debt policy is we've tried to stay at or slightly below in the full 10-year period. And as mentioned at Monday's General Issues Committee, staff will continue to monitor these forecasts and amend these forecasts based on our pace of growth relative to our forecasted pace of growth, as well as the timing of capital projects and the opportunity to adjust our financing requirements to better align to the timing of capital projects. As identified on Monday through the rate supported deliberations, our growth-related debt is one of the contributing factors to our forecasted increase in debt. And you can see, again, as it relates to the split of growth-related tax and rates, tax being the blue bar and rate being the gray bar, it is our rate program, capital growth program as it relates to development that we're seeing the greatest increase in needed investment. And you can see that investment ramps up and somewhat peaks and stays somewhat constant at approximately just short of $59 million annually in 2029 through to 2031. So again, staff will be monitoring the pace of growth and our need to rely on debt as it relates to our actual growth relative to our forecasted growth. As mentioned previously, one of the financing tools municipalities rely on are our reserves, and we make contributions annually towards reserves in order to maintain not only our assets such as facilities and roads, but as well as our fleet assets. And for 2022, staff are recommending to draw approximately $10 million from reserves for fleet vehicles and equipment, approximately $9.4 million for Hamilton Fire Services, emergency vehicles and fire apparatus, and approximately $5.6 million in reserves towards our HSR bus replacement program. As mentioned previously, the City of Hamilton does practice multi-year budgeting, and we have a 4-year multi-year budget that we support. You can see for the periods 2022 through to 2025, staff are recommending a 0.5% capital levy increase in each of those years. The overall increase varies from a 0.65 recommended in 2022 to approximately 0.51 in 2025. And you can see that the transit ISIP is one of those contributing factors to the variability, as well as the West Harbour project. As it relates to the overall spend in the 10-year forecast, staff are forecasting an overall investment of approximately $1.3 billion. And you can see the breakdown between funding sources, including transfers from operating, reserves, development charges, subsidy, federal gas tax, as well as external debt. And as it relates to the 10-year forecast, similar to 2022, the majority of the $1.3 billion investment is forecasted towards rehabilitation of existing assets, approximately 64%, the balance towards supporting growth. Some of the major initiatives in the period 2023 to 2025 is the continued investment in the 10-year transit strategy and the bus expansion program, continued investments towards modal splits, and continued investments as it relates to the HSR bus replacement program, as well as some growth-related projects, including Gardner Road and Arterial Road 1N in our AGD area. Other major initiatives include the Waterdown Pool and Recreation Center facility, Riverdale Community Hub, Winona Recreation Center feasibility, Mount Hope Library expansion, East Hamilton, replace and expand the library, as well as the Stony Creek Downtown Library. Some of the parks include Sam Lawrence Park and Confederation Park. Again, this is the first of two scheduled general issues committee. Again, just wanting to thank committee for your patience and attention this morning. Staff are available to answer any questions committee members might have. Our next scheduled tax capital GIC is December 2nd, and we are targeting approval of the 2022 tax supported capital budget on December 15th. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to stop sharing the presentation and happy to take any questions committee members might have.
Thank you, Mike. Excellent presentation. And I do have a speaker's list. I'll start with Councillor Ferguson, sir.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chairman. Mike, a lot of numbers here. And so I just want to be clear about the bottom line. The impact to the 2022 levy then is 0.65%. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, and what was it last year?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, we deferred, because of the pandemic, we deferred the 0.5%. If you recall, that in part helped us to arrive at the overall residential tax increase of 1.9%. So again, because of the pandemic and concerns around the tax burden, is council staff recommended and council approved deferring the 0.5% for 2021.
And that's the second time we've done that since we implemented that 0.5%, isn't it?
Yeah, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, council has only deferred on two occasions the capital levy increase, and the councilor is correct. That was 2021 was the second time. And again, because of the pandemic and the concerns we have with respect to what was transpiring in the community around affordability.
So the last time we did this was 2020 then. So what was the impact to the levy in 2020?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'll ask staff to correct me if it wasn't the 0.5%, and it might have varied because of, again, transit and West Harbour. But again, it would have been the 0.5 and I believe an additional levy for those two programs.
Okay. So the 0.15 is not new then. It doesn't get layered on, although I guess that's problematic because if we benchmark off last year, it's actually a 0.65 hit increase in 21 to 22 then.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes, and I should also highlight, I don't believe I highlighted this through my presentation, the 0.65 is already reflected in our 2022 forecast outlook of approximately 3.9%. Committee members may recall I presented an earlier outlook of 3.9%, and that incorporated the 0.65.
Right, but that was a 4% increase, and of course we set a guideline at 2%, so we got a gap there of a couple percent. Okay, Madam Chair, that's all my questions for now. I would like to, get the questions today, but hold the debate until the second meeting. First of all, there's a lot of numbers here to try to digest, and second of all, I think during before the meeting started, I mentioned that I was trying to dissect the numbers electronically and was inquiring about if we're going to get budget books, and apparently they're out, but they're sitting on my EA's desk and I didn't know it. So I haven't had a chance to review them. Stephanie's good enough to try to bring that part way up the hill, but with City Hall closed, I never go down there now. And I see Councillor Danko's waving his, but I never saw it because I didn't go to City Hall. And typically my mail comes to the Municipal Service Center. I don't know what happened here. So I'm at the will of council, but I'd like to see after the questions that we just adjourn until the December 2nd and finish the discussion then, to allow all of us the opportunity to digest this massive amount of information and numbers. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, GM Zagaric. I too have a number of detailed questions, and they relate to the thick book as opposed to your presentation. So I'm looking to the chair on whether I can proceed with those questions.
Well, Councillor Powers just made the suggestion, so I would say yes, go ahead. This is the time to ask the questions, and obviously, if we ask them today, staff have time to bring back answers if they don't have them today. So yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Zagaric. So I'm still struggling with trying to understand what will be the anticipated impact of this asset management requirement funding scheme with that, which a theme I think I see presented in this budget, and that is one of, and I think you used the word, a lack of consistent and dedicated funding with respect to our reinvestment. So I'm not quite clear. You referenced that we've only deferred below the 0.5% on 2 occasions, but yet the report talks about a lack of consistency. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that again for me, please.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, happy to highlight a few of our traditional funding sources where there is some uncertainty and potentially some risk. As committee are quite familiar, we have grown dependent on, for instance, the federal gas tax funds and the provincial gas tax funds. The provincial gas tax funds, I believe somewhere in the area of $11 million annually, are dedicated towards transit. The federal gas tax funds, approximately $32.7 million, are dedicated principally towards roads, bridges, traffic, but do provide some additional investments in other program areas, including transit. I believe $3.7 million transit. Here lies some of the uncertainty and some of the risks as it relates to our financing strategy is, and just again, wanting to give recognition and appreciation to the senior levels of government. Mm-hmm. Those gas tax revenues are tied to their revenues as it relates to gas sales and consumption. And because of the pandemic, as we can all understand and appreciate, is as people were practicing good public health guidance and restricting travel, that would have had an impact on fuel sales and their revenues. the provincial government has committed to making municipalities whole for 2021. And the federal commitment, I believe, comes to an end in 2022. And as electric vehicles are promoted, and as the reliance on fossil fuel vehicles may change over time, it creates some uncertainty and risk as it relates to those revenue streams that municipalities have grown reliant on. So again, it does form some of the conversations that treasurers are having in Ontario, is the need to continue to identify opportunities on evolving the financial relationship with senior levels government. To illustrate one opportunity is during the pandemic, we've seen a real upsurge in e-commerce, and municipalities do not realize any direct revenue streams as it relates to e-commerce. And again, while the senior levels of government, principally federal governments, introduced a digital tax, that's not an opportunity for municipalities. So again, just wanting to illustrate some of the uncertainty as it relates to our multi-year financing strategy and the need to further evolve the conversations with senior levels of government to ensure sustainable funding to municipalities, similar to the level of funding that they've historically provided through the gas tax revenues.
Thank you, Mike. Through you to the chair. To that point, I think in your budget book you referenced that instead of what we were anticipating, $104 million capital financing gap, we're at 12 million because of that senior 12 million gap because of that senior level of government fund. Let me be more direct then in my question. We have a mounting infrastructure deficit. And I'm certainly was never and do not favor our shifting away from our capital reinvestment strategy. If anything, I think it's a grave worry for me if we deviate from it. I am trying to understand my comment about, or my question about, the asset management commitment and our reinvestment strategy, just so I understand. You state in your report that current investment levels to the transportation network are sufficient to maintain the asset conditions as indicated in the 2016 asset report card. Is that asset report card the grades which are set out in page 15? So water, a C, wastewater, a C+, stormwater, a C+, road network, a C. Is that what our funding levels are going to secure those grades? Just through you to the chair.
Yeah. So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I do appreciate the question because it allows staff to expand on what's before you in the staff report. To the councillor's question, yes, the table on the bottom of page 15 is the table that would have been presented through the State of the Infrastructure report in 2016. And while that report identified that the funding levels are sufficient as it relates to the road network, there was a subsequent report in 2018 that identified in order to maintain our current level of service, it would require an additional $25 million in annual investments. And again, based on that earlier analysis, based on Ontario Regulation 588, which was the graphic that I presented on slide 7, is recognizing we have an infrastructure deficit as it relates to our existing assets. Hence the reason staff are recommending directing that future 0.5% towards each of the blocks to increase the funding capacity for each of our program areas to, in part, offset some of the inflationary pressures, by recognizing that we have an infrastructure deficit and recognizing that staff and council will need to discuss and approve levels of service for our core assets in 2022. In anticipation of that work, we see the opportunity to start to increase the level of funding in each of the program areas as it relates to rehabilitating existing assets.
Thank you. I'll take some of those questions maybe offline in advance. Could you clarify for me through the chair to Mr. Zagaric? There's reference that says the 2022 capital budget and financing plan includes two other projects that are integral and a $33 million new parking garage for along the waterfront. In approving this budget, are we approving that amount through you
Yep.
to the chair?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, no. The
Thank
parking garage is a future project and one that staff will likely have to report back on as it relates to the funding of that project. So again, that is a waterfront redevelopment project. Just as a reminder, I believe just approximately just short of 10 million of the $33 million were to be DC funded, and under the amendments to the DC Act is parking services and airport services are no longer, or sorry, beyond September of 2022 are not eligible for development charges. So as it relates to parking facilities and airports, when staff report back on opportunities surrounding community benefit charges, that may be one opportunity to mitigate some of the foregone revenue as it relates to parking and airport DCs. But again, to the councillor's question, committee and council are not asked today to approve the parking facility. It's a future project, and it's presented there for approval in principle. But the financing strategy for parking will have to be revisited because of the amendments in the DC Act and the fact that parking beyond September 2022 will no longer be an eligible service as it relates to development charges.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Mike. I wasn't intending to actually drill on this today, but I'm not quite sure I understood what you just said. So you're not seeking approval of this today. However, staff would be coming back with ways and means to finance it subsequently. So that I would assume that's based on the premise that we would be approving it if they're going to be spending energies on so doing. Because my concern is on page 33 of your report, it says in trying to investigate ways and means to fund it, staff will also be looking at eliminating specific projects in their entirety. And I have no idea what projects that might be pertaining to the West Harbour. So can you just clarify that again for me? Or
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, to be clear, committee is not being asked today nor through the 2022 tax deliberations to approve the forecasted $33 million for the parking garage. What I was trying to highlight is that the financing scenario that was prepared in advance of the changes to the DC Act will have to be amended because there was approximately $10 million assumed in development charges against that $33 million investment that we will not be able to realize because of the changes in the DC Act. So again, that project will have to be reviewed. And I don't know what, at this time, I can't speculate what the review will identify. There may be alternative ways of meeting that parking opportunity with other partners or stakeholders within the overall development. But again, just wanting to highlight that while those assumptions were appropriate at the time with the changes in the DC Act, it is triggering and requiring staff to revisit that financing strategy.
Chairperson, I'm not sure about my time, whether you're including the answers or cumulatively what. I have one more question.
Councillor, you're near, but I've tried to separate as best I can when you're speaking and stop when Mike is speaking. So go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Zagaric, I have a question. It's with respect to affordable housing, which we identify as a strategic priority, and it's summarized as such on page 60 of the big book. Yet, when I look at the charts, page 43, housing in terms of what we're earmarking is at the bottom in the amounts. And I'm trying to figure out, clearly recognizing that the parameters. You said we're the only jurisdiction in North America that funds social housing off the back of the property taxes. Clearly that's dumb. But I'm I'm trying to look to the future, and I think you identified that the Poverty Reduction Fund, at least that $4 million annually for affordable housing new builds ends at the end of this year. What is our strategy moving forward for having a fund available, or could we have a fund available, or is there a potential fund available that would provide us with that seed money that would enable us to partner with senior orders of government on affordable housing projects? Through you, Chair.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, maybe I'll just rely on the National Co-Investment Fund, and I'm not sure if Edward John or others might have additional information. First off, what is before you is the capital budget. I think I know for a fact what you will see is a significant commitment, local commitment towards affordable housing through the tax-supported operating budget. In terms of magnitude of investment, it's probably next to employees, our second highest level or area of investment next to our commitments of employees. So as it relates to capital is where we are seeing some additional commitments from the federal government is around the capital investment programs through the rapid housing investment programs. The city's contribution through that isn't reflected in the capital budget, but rather it will be reflected in the operating budget because effectively it is loan and debt repayments, and those are of an operating nature. So not wanting to, unfortunately, because we have a separate capital and operating budget, one might be left with the impression is we aren't making a significant investment, but we are, and it's principally on the operating side. So as it relates to the $194 million in commitment, again, I believe it's $135 million is municipal funding, and that will be reflected through the operating budget, through the repayment of loans, and through the funding through housing services to City Housing Hamilton as the housing provider.
Thank you, Mr. Skerrick.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'm going to go now to Councillor Powers, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair. I have an ask and I have a question, and then I just have a brief statement. So as always, Mr. Skerrick, your presentations are very informative. My ask is perhaps we provided a copy of the deck that you've just given us. It will assist us in digesting the two Bibles that were provided to us as we head towards December the 15th. I support what Councillor Ferguson has indicated with regards to let's try to get questions through today and then defer the decisions until December the 15th at that point. I have my simple question, and it may not be relative to this budget, but with the recent decision by Electra to phase out the billing, is there any requirements for us from a capital standpoint in order to invest in support and infrastructure enhancements in our IT or whatever the case is in order to make that happen, or is that costed inside of the operating budgets?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, firstly, we're happy to share the slide deck through clerks to the councillors or any additional information that might have formed part of my discussion to the slide decks.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Councillor Powers, and welcome back to our annual budget process. With respect to Electra, just as a reminder, that contractual relationship doesn't expire until December 31st of 2024. So we do have some time to try to assess a path forward as it relates to those services. So to your question, no, there are no additional asks as it relates to that relationship for 2022. And it would likely be reflected in future rate budget presentations, likely for 2023, 2024.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I forgot the exact date when the arrangement with Electra took place and that. So I have no further questions, but once again, I support after all the appropriate questions and statements that we receive the presentation and defer decisions until December the 15th.
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor. And I just note Clerk Paparella is advising that the presentation is in your agenda item on your eScribe. It's at the bottom. So if you click on it, it is available there, but she's also going to have it. Madam Clerk, go ahead.
No, sorry, I will also email it out in case Councillor Powers wants to print it out. But the Councillor Powers had mentioned making a decision on December the 15th. We will be making a decision on December the 2nd, which will go to Council for ratification on the 15th. I just want to make sure he was on the same. I'll email that out to everybody shortly.
Thank you. I was going to catch that as well. Thank you, Madam Clerk. So
Then
I'm sorry, go ahead, Councillor Powers.
So when I sort out my eScribe, I'll try to find it, but please in the interim, forward it on. Thank you.
No problem at all. It's the very last item. It usually says presentation, but no problem. And Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you can. You're heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm on page 15 of the report, which is the report card that I believe Councillor Wilson was referring to. And the question that I have is specific to the road network. When I'm looking at it, it shows us that in 2009 we had a D minus. We're now at a C. The verbatim is that the physical condition is generally in fair condition. And there is a lack of dedicated funding to sustain the assets. Is there a definition of a fair condition?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I think I need to invite a colleague from Public Works to answer that question. I'm not sure if Craig or a member
and
of his team.
I apologize. I usually get my questions to them in advance, Deputy Mayor, but going through this rather large package, that didn't happen.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would ask that Edward Soldo, if he's on the line, if he could answer
that. Thank you through the chair to the councillor. There is a definition of fair. Unfortunately, councillor, I do not have it with me. It is something that we are looking at through our asset management plan that's being undertaken by Pat Leishman, the Director of Corporate Asset Management. So I'm not sure if she can provide a definition.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's Pat Leishman, Director of Corporate Asset Management, and through the chair, we are working very closely with all of our colleagues across the city to look at putting proper definitions in place. As roads is part of our core asset management plan, it is one of the earlier ones that's being focused on. So I don't have that definition at the moment. It's going to be one that's going to be finalized over the next short term as it's finalized into our asset management plan that will be coming back to council by Q2 of next year.
And likewise, Deputy Mayor, I question how would we define a good condition? Because when they're in this chart, it specifically references that in case street lighting is generally in good condition. How do we define good and how do we define fair? That would be very helpful to me.
Yeah. Through the chair again, Councillor Clark, it's very important that we have these definitions and that each asset category will have clear definitions as to what is good, very good, fair, poor, We all need to understand what those scales look like so that when we're talking about these asset categories, we have a really good understanding of what poor or very poor looks like, so that when we're making decisions around where to put our funding, it's very, very clear to us why and what condition, what exactly that condition looks like.
Deputy Mayor, I really appreciate that explanation. The supplementary question would be, in these charts, it shows there is a lack of dedicated funding to sustain assets for road network, for stormwater, for wastewater, for water in general. So do we, I'm struggling trying to find the words for the question, but what I'm trying to understand is what a cost it would be to have a dedicated line of funding to sustain the assets. So what investment, thank you, what investment would be needed to ensure that we have, by staff's definition, a dedicated funding source to sustain these assets?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I think I heard two questions there, and I'll try to answer. Just drawing from the report that's before committee is moving on to page 16. You'll see the reference to roads, bridges, and traffic capital. And through the work of our colleagues in Public Works, what was identified is a sustainable annual investment is $150 million as it relates to those assets. For 2022, staff are proposing a gross investment of $83.5 million as it relates to those assets. So there is a gap as it relates to our current level of funding and what was identified previously as the sustainable annual investment. I think the second part to the councillor's question is how a municipality would move forward in terms of financing that gap, and it would be likely a combination of what we refer to as contribution from operating, which is effectively additional tax revenue and additional tax levy, some form of debt reliance, because again, these are assets with a relatively long life, 15, 20 years that benefit beyond the current generation, the next generation potentially. And so debt is a responsible financing tool. I've already spoken to the federal gas tax and some of the risks associated with the federal gas tax, as we rely in part on the federal gas tax as it relates to roads, bridges, and traffic. And so that really needs to be resolved, I think, for municipalities, as we've all grown dependent on federal gas tax. This has been a long-standing relationship, and to remove some of that support would create some gaps or challenges for municipalities. So to the councillor's question around financing tools, it would typically rely on operating or additional taxes, some additional debt, and needing to shore up and hopefully increase the level of support from senior levels of government.
And thank you for that, Deputy Mayor Pearson. So the line that Mr. Zagaric referenced was on page 16. The sustainable annual investment amount for roads, bridges, and traffic capital improvements is approximately $150 million. Can we get a breakout of that figure for roads, for bridges, for sidewalks? I'm assuming sidewalks are with roads. Is that a possibility, Deputy Mayor Pearson?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, we can take that away and maybe expand on what is presented in tables 3 and 4, where there is some breakdown, but not to the level that the councillor is asking for as it relates to asset classes, principally sidewalks. So we can take that ask away and look to provide that to all committee members.
And if I may, Deputy Mayor, in that chart that would come back to the GIC, can we get the 2021 investment, the gross and net figures for each of those parameters, roads, bridges. I find it would be interesting to see what we invested last year, what is being called for this year, and then what it would take in each of those categories to have a sustainable annual funding amount, so that we can get in my mind, a clearer picture. Is that possible, Deputy Mayor Pearson?
Yeah. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, we can work with our colleagues in Public Works towards satisfying that ask.
Thank you. Does that need to be in a motion, Madam Deputy Mayor, or is it fine? Because it's going to be coming back for December 2nd, I'm assuming, through you to Mr. Zagaric.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, again, I'm satisfied through a direction, and we've noted it, and we can work towards providing that information by December 2nd.
I'm good with that, Deputy Mayor Pearson. I thank you for that. Those were all my only questions. I'm trying to get a real picture in terms of what we need to do annually to get us up to that level where people are happy with the roads and sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and I certainly appreciate that question. And I think something that will have to be reflected as well through that process is going to be, and I'm sure Mike will clarify and reiterate, is that some of the stuff as bridges will be like, it's not going to be ongoing. Once some of these are done, it's going to be a long term before it comes back to us. So I see like CN and things like that, right? Correct, Mike?
So through the chair, that's correct. There are somewhat cycles to some of these asset classes. And based on the risks of some of these asset classes, you will see that it varies. The level of investment annually varies according to the risk profile for the various asset classes. So again, we can try to provide the information that Councillor Clark has asked for 2021 to allow for that comparison between periods 2021 and 2022.
And Deputy Mayor Pearson, please staff don't think of my questions as being disparaging. I'm just trying to understand where we're going, and I'm very pleased with the report that you provided and the direction you provided today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Mayor, please.
Thank you. I always look forward to receiving my dual preliminary tax supported capital budget documents. It's a very important part of the work that we need to do to ensure that our future infrastructure and capital needs, culturally and infrastructure wise, are looked after in coming years. So thank you for all that great work. I do have a question on the 0.5% additional capital that we had previously introduced as part of our effort to get on top of some of the capital infrastructure shortfall. And I might have missed it in the presentation or in the book. Are we taking another pause on that 0.5 percentage point, which I think actually ultimately needs to be a 1%, but 0.5% is what we've previously supported. Are we recommending another pause, or is that part of the 6.65%?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, it is part of the 6.65%, so staff are not recommending a pause, and the change in strategy through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, to the Mayor for 2023 to 25 is staff are earmarking those future forecasted 0.5% towards rehabilitation of existing assets. So recognizing the work that staff and council have to undertake jointly around asset management plans, we're recognizing and anticipating a need to increase the level of investment towards rehabilitating our existing assets. So we are earmarking those future 0.5% forecasted levy increases towards those efforts.
Okay, thank you. So I might have missed that, but I thought that was always the case, that we were identifying that 0.5% towards existing assets as opposed to creating new. So was that not always the case previously? Did we not always have that identified to maintain and repair as opposed to adding new?
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the historical, with the exception of 2 years, the historical 0.5% has gone principally towards rehabilitating. existing assets, but not exclusively towards rehabilitating existing assets. So I'll illustrate I believe it was close to $20 million investment Emerald Ash Borer. During those years, a portion of the 0.5% went towards that additional investment towards our Emerald Ash Borer strategy, investments in parkland, including Gage Park, Greenhouse Park, Macassa Lodge, some investments in previous years in Macassa Lodge. So over the last 10 plus years, there have been, including West Harbor, there have been additional investments that have crowded out some of that 0.5% towards rehabilitating existing assets. What staff are suggesting for the forecast 23 through 25, that 0.5% be dedicated towards rehabilitating existing assets, and any additional initiatives be funded through incremental or increased capital levy increases.
Good. That's great. I think that's exactly the right thing to do. I thought that's where we were with that 0.5%, but that's good. So for 2022, that's the process that we're going to evolve, right? This is now for the next budget year. So that 0.5% will go to solely rehabilitating existing infrastructure assets, as opposed to inspiring new infrastructure assets. That's great.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, that's correct. And the additional 0.15 is towards our obligations as it relates to transit and West Harbor redevelopment.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And, I do believe it, a 1% would actually get us further along in terms of the capital asset requirements. I think, Mike, you might want to explain what a 0.5% added in actually amounts to over the years in terms of additional resources that we're going to be able to use to revitalize our infrastructure. And it's not, in raw dollars, it's an accumulating amount. So did you want to kind of share your thoughts on what that 0.5% means in terms of real dollars for future infrastructure upgrades or improvements or rehabilitation, I should say?
Yeah, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, is one of the benefits of a consistent approach to, for instance, the 0.5% is the compounding benefit of that 0.5%. So each year that City Council approves a 0.5%, subsequent years, that 0.5%, we generate some compounding benefit as relates to that. And that in part has helped to offset some of the inflationary pressures that each of the programs would have experienced. I don't have a number to illustrate what the benefit would be over a 10-year period, but again, there is a benefit as it relates to the overall funding capacity. And that's why in previous years, staff have been hesitant to pause on the 0.5%, recognizing we forego the compounding benefit.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of put you on the spot. So it might be helpful for all members of council and community to understand how that compounding actually benefits the infrastructure rehabilitation over a 10-year capital budget process. So if you can, maybe for the next meeting, have some frame around that, I think that'd be helpful. Just to go from away from the general into the specific, I do recall that there was a strong desire to have a recreational facility in Bimbrook quite some time ago, at least a few years ago. And I'm not aware of if there's anything been dedicated towards the feasibility of a facility of that nature in Bimbrook at this point in time as part of the capital budget. So maybe some of the cultural staff that might be here might be able to point me to it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because I haven't seen every page of the document, but I wouldn't mind knowing if anything has been identified for the future recreational facility for Bimbrook. And if you don't have the answer right now, I'm happy to receive that through text or email. I'm just curious as to whether or not it's there, and if not, in my view, it should be. Certainly, it's been a growing community in Bimbrook, significantly growing community, lots of children, and certainly, you know, an increasing demand for cultural recreational facilities that at some point we need to address. So just, Mike, if you can, if the answer isn't available today, I'm more than happy to have staff get back to me on that.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'll have to take that request away, and hopefully we can come back at our next GIC with that information.
Great. Thank you very much. Much appreciated, and great work as always. And I look forward to approving the capital budget, you know, sooner rather than later. And I think there's always an impact in terms of delay for the capital budget process, which obviously then potentially delays a lot of the work that needs to come out of it for the 2022 capital budget process. So I think there's always the desire to get the capital budget approved so that we can get on with the balance of the operating budget is starting in the new year. So I look forward to seeing it early in December. Thank you.
My apologies. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I now have Councillor Wilson second time.
Thank you, through the chair, to Mr. Zagaric or whomever. There is reference about a report coming back to council in November on the climate change reserve. And I'm wondering, is it still coming back in November, as we're almost near the end of November, and what committee or venue will it be coming back? Thank you, through the chair.
So through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'm going to suggest it will not be coming back in the coming days. I'll have to check with staff as to the revised timing for that report. Just as a reminder, Council did establish a climate change reserve. You did, through the 2020 year-end process, dedicate $1 million from the surplus towards the climate change reserve. But with respect to that report, I will have to circle back with staff as to what the revised date is. Or Stephanie has it already.
I do. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. That report is coming to the December 8th GIC.
December 8th, GIC. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thank you, through the chair. I just appreciate my colleague, Councillor Clark's drilling further into our infrastructure deficit as it pertains to what we identify as a key priority in our capital budget, and that's the roads, bridges, traffic infrastructure. Because I'm still not clear on, in providing for a 10-year capital budget, and then we have an asset management plan coming forward, how one is going to inform or influence the other if we have a rehabilitation deficit of $1.6 billion. So I'm looking forward to that additional information coming forward. Mr. Zagaric, every year I ask you this, so I'm going to do it again for an update on our percentage. My understanding is on the capital reinvestment, I believe you informed us previously that the Ontario average threshold is somewhere between 12 to 15% of the capital budget is for reinvestment. And we had fallen down to 9%, although we were at 11% at the time of amalgamation for reinvestment. Do you know what percentage we are at now, please?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I'll turn to Director Mcmullen. I think we're at 13%, but I'll ask Brian if he can confirm that.
Good morning, Council. Yeah, Brian Mcmullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration, and Policy. Yeah, so to Councillor Wilson, yeah, we're currently at 13. I think it's about 13.3% within our tax operating budget.
Thank you. Thank you. And the question that I had, thank you, Brian. The question I had asked, I think Director Hollingsworth, was of the amount we spend on transportation infrastructure, what percentage, Mr. Zagaric, do we spend on our cycling? infrastructure capital.
Oh, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I would have to come back in December.
Okay.
I don't.
No, that's fair.
I'll need my calculator in a few minutes, but we can come back with that
Okay.
at our next General Issues Committee.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And with that, that exhausts the speakers. Councillor Brenda Johnson, sorry you're not on the chat. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I did have my name down. I was surprised I haven't been called, but thank you anyway. So the mayor's absolutely right. The rec center has disappeared, as well as a lot of my park development money has disappeared as well. So I really need to sit down with staff and figure out where it all went. We're missing Summerlee West, we're missing Cache Developments, we're missing all kinds of things out of Ward 11 as far as park development and the rec center. The rec center was always in the capital budget. It just isn't there today, and I don't know why. And also, we're still waiting to hear for the sewer and the water to come across, because the only place to put the rec center is going to be in the green belt. So it's a matter of figuring out whether or not, number one, do we have the capacity to pull those pipes over to the green belt after doing this big, huge tunneling project? And the second item is whether or not we can pull the sewer and water over, because it is in the green belt. So we're still waiting to hear on capacity numbers. I think I referred to that when we were talking about the urban boundary expansion. Anyway, so we'll keep everybody apprised and find out where all my money went. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just relinquish chair real quick to Mr. Mayor. Just one question, and I will take it offline for staff to respond back for the next meeting. But I noticed in the budget book they're allocating dollars to it's to the Kiwanis Community Center roof and HVAC. I thought we had dealt with that a few months ago in an in-camera report. So I will follow up with staff and have the answer before the next meeting. Thank you, everyone. I'll take the chair back, Mr. Mayor. And since there is, sorry. Okay, I'm just reading through. Madam Clerk, don't worry. I'm sure Councillor Johnson's not concerned that you missed her name, and that's fine. Now, with no further speakers, may I please have an electronic vote to receive the presentation? And I believe I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Mr. Mayor, seconded by Councillor Powers. Electronic vote, please, everyone, to receive the presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. Councillor Vanderbeek, are you able to vote? Thank you.
And I don't see Councillor Marula, so.
Vote carries 12-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put the report on the floor of, there's Councillor Marula. Can I say moved by Councillor Marula, second by Councillor Wilson?
Madam Chair, I was here and I just voted, so FYI.
Okay.
Why you just
That's fine. I didn't see you on the screen, sir. Not a problem.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm asking you to, you're moving the report then that's going on the floor, moved by, seconded by Councillor Wilson, Madam Clerk?
Yes, are you moving the capital budget report right now?
You have next on the row on the
No, I just wanted
no.
to make sure. I thought they were going to defer it, so I was just asking
Yes,
which vote I need to pull up. Yeah.
Yeah, so can I have a mover and a sec? So the direction to defer, I believe, was started by Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Ferguson, do you want to put that on the floor, please?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it's moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Clark, that the report be deferred to the next meeting, and that'll be a recorded vote, please. Thank you for catching that, Stephanie.
You're welcome. Thank you, Councillor Powers. Carries 12-0.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to discussion items now. 7.1 is the Hamilton Police Services Board Report 21098. Hamilton Police Service projected capital expenditures for 2022 to 2031. And members of committee, the Hamilton Police Services Board is requesting approval of 7 items for the 2022 capital budget report program. We will go through each item separately to see if there's any discussion as well. The votes have also been separated. So with committee's indulgence, in item 1 is the 2022 to 2026 roof replacements, 200,000 in 2022 and 2,665,000 total. Is there any discussion on this item? Councillor Ferguson, sorry, I'll go back into the chat.
Yeah, just a question. I can't remember. Is the police capital budget funded through their own capital program? I know that's been the case on a few big projects. Or is this added to the city's capital program?
Sorry, is Mike available?
Yes, yeah, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. It is a combination through you to Councillor Ferguson. The overall 2022 request is $3.7 million net, 2.6 million, and that is net of some development charges and some contributions from Hamilton Police Services reserves. I don't have the breakdown before me. It may be in the Hamilton Police Services report. It's in the detail sheets to our capital budget book. But again, it is a combination of municipal contribution from as well as development charges, and then some Hamilton Police Services reserve funding as well. And just procedurally, and maybe for a discussion with the clerk, is the Hamilton Police Services budget is reflected in the staff report and is well reflected in the budget documents in the presentation. So again, the $3.7 million and $2.6 million net is reflected in the report. And so committee may wish to defer this issue to the next GIC as you deliberate on the staff report and the recommendations. So again, I'm sure staff are available to answer any questions as it relates to the specific projects, but procedurally, it may be best to defer this issue as committee deliberates on the overall budget and the staff recommendation report.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on that, Mike, first of all, you're saying that the net amount, which is the city has to fund, is included in 6.1?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, yes. And I appreciate Councillor Ferguson doesn't have access to his budget documents, but when you do receive those budget documents on page 215 of Book 1, Councillor Ferguson, you'll find a summary of Hamilton Police Services capital projects as have been presented by the service to the city. And so we are consistent with the report that went to the board. And again, they are reflected in the numbers that I presented this morning, and they are reflected in the staff report recommendation report that's before you for consideration.
And one last question. So the year-over-year net number to the city, how has that changed, up or down?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, I did have that, but I don't have it on hand.
Okay,
sure
you probably should defer this anyways. You said if it's included in 6.1, if we approved 6.1 of the capital budget, this would also be approved, is what I heard you say.
Yes, yes.
So it seemed to make sense that we also defer this until we deal with 6.1, Madam Chair. I'd be happy to move that if you like.
Okay, thank you. Before we do that, though, my apologies. I should have mentioned we also have and welcome Chief Frank Bergen here today, Deputy Ryan Diodati, and Deputy Paul Hamilton, along with John Randazzo, the Chief Financial Officer for Hamilton Police Services. Welcome, everybody. So
well, maybe John knows the answer to that question then. I didn't realize we had all the top brass from police here. So the year-over-year increase in capital net impact to Hamilton, how does it compare, John? Or anybody else that wants to answer from the HPS?
Good morning, and thank you. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, it's the 2022 capital portion of the police budget is approximately just under $500,000 from 2021.
Just under 500,000 higher or lower?
Sorry, that will be May I ask you to restate the question? Are you understanding for the city's consideration from one year to the next?
Yes, so that's it. The request to the city for capital, because I just heard Mike say that part of it's from your own reserves, which is how I remember it in my day, and part of it is I can't remember the second one, and the third part was from the city. So year over year request to the city, net number to the city. What's the change?
I apologize through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I don't have that number readily available, but I will be able to get that number as quickly as possible and report back.
Yeah, it'd be fine just if we have it by December 2nd then, because I intend to place a motion if I'm able to, Madam Chair, to just defer the police also to December 2nd, because it's incorporated in item 6.1, which is the capital budget.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor, but I do have a speakers list. I'm just going to allow the questioning and then we'll defer it at the end. Is that appropriate then, everyone? So
That's perfect.
Thank you. I'm going ahead now. Mr. Mayor, please.
Well, thank you. And, traditionally, we do give the chief and staff an opportunity to do the overview of the request, which I think would be worthwhile to do, and then maybe any questions that come out of that. So I was just going to take a moment to introduce the chief and the deputies that are here, and John Randazzo, our CFO. So they're all available for questions and any answers. But if I could, I'd just like to turn it over to the chief for a moment to kind of introduce this item and maybe just put on the floor his perspective on the capital needs going forward.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we'll ask that for each item that's on the police budget discussion today. Good morning, Chief.
Well, to be fair, I mean, each item is all the capital requests that are in there. I would prefer that he give us an overview on all of them, all in one shot.
That's
and we're going to defer in any event. So let's get the broad picture, and then when we defer and come back, we'll be voting on each item.
Thank you very much for the. Thank you very much, and through the chair, we do appreciate the work that we have received, and up to including even discussions this week with Mike Zagaric and Brian, having those conversations to put this into perspective and to answer what Councillor Ferguson has also asked. There has been fluctuating asks over the 10-year projections. This is the 10-year projection that is 2022 up to 2031, as has been stated. Those fluctuations have included the onboarding of ISD building and other impacts on there. We will, for your December review, have perhaps an overview over the last few years what that fluctuation looks like. And we also rely on working with the city. What has been depicted is accurate in a basket that is a 10-year plan capital ask of $3.7 million. 2.6 million of that is in cooperation and working with Mike and Brian and the team. The reality is we do have to fund from our reserves, and people are fully cognizant of that area. In this overview over the next 10 years, what we have projected as the impacts have included in an executive summary format. Item 1, roof replacement of our police stations. And in fact, what we're doing is we're putting these in piecemeal additions that will build ultimately to a $2.6 million ask, but it will be in installments of $200,000 over each year. Item 2 is brick repair and basement superstructure. To be cautious here, we've actually delayed this, and it is actually putting our infrastructure in peril. We are right now currently a headquarters that is well over 46 years old, and we are at a point right now where we're doing a feasibility study. We have hired a contractor to assist us in what in fact is ultimately going to be the ongoing pressure of this aged building, and that is currently listed at $275,000. And again, we caution that it has been delayed already a number of years, and it's starting to put us in risk. Item 3 is a generator system fuel upgrade in Station 10, which is our central site. And we're looking at a smaller number of $75,000 as an impact because it has gone past its life cycle. Item 4 is a 2022 pressure. It's a fuel tank replacement in Station 20, which is our east end. The reality of that particular challenge has been whether or not we are meeting the actual TSSA standard whether in fact there is challenges with regards to seepage within the actual soil in that particular area. So we are working closely with our technical standards safety authority to make sure that we can meet that. Item 4 is again, the fuel tank replacement. So there's upgrades and generators, but that replacement is $350,000. Item 5 is a boiler replacement and piping, again in Station 20. The age of the building is now gone into life cycle again. That is a cost that's going to be an impact of approximately $260,000. Item 6 is the generator or diesel tank repair, and this one is up at Station 30. This is on our mountain, and again, this is a price that's reasonable, and it sits at $65,000. Item 7 is a long-term commitment in total of $4.2 million impact, but this is our infrastructure, which was really our portable radio system that is tied to our city contract with Motorola, and we've been working with them on our mobile communication devices. And in the long term, this actual item 7 is an impact of $1.4 million for that 2022 installment. Door replacements, item 8 is a front door installation. The aged building and the deterioration of that structure is going to require $60,000. Item 9 is parking lot replacements. These do not come cheap, and you've already talked about your infrastructure of road systems, and we're looking at a $2.5 million hit. And that one is going to be done again from 2025 to 2027. We are pushing that off. That is not a priority right now. But again, with this process of a 10-year plan, we're reporting it to you. In 2022, we have an impact, and that is a Chubb panel upgrade. Chubb Edwards, the proprietor of the access egress of all our buildings and our security systems within our police functions and facilities. We have become obsolete in many of the hardware, and this is best described as a life cycle repair to be current in our security, and that's $150,000. Another impact, which is an interesting conversation to have at this table, is what will be our projected impact of a 9mm conversion from our 40 caliber Glock pistol. The reality of our Glock pistol is really the ammunition. The ammunition has become become obsolete. Right now, there are no other services within our community, in fact, all across North America. So if in fact we want 40 caliber ammunition, they have to shut down a line. Everybody knows about the issues right now with supply chain management and the pressures. We, in fact, right now have not received over the last 2 years our supply. We bought a surplus from the Ontario Provincial Police, and that has been able to sustain us. So instead of us just doing a life cycle of a Glock program, 40 caliber, we will be doing a 5-year rent to own deal with, in fact, the 9mm conversion, an actually very prudent way to do it. And that'll be an impact year over year, but it'll start with $183,000 over a 5-year plan. A prudent way for us to be modern in regards to our response to use of force. And finally, something that has been on here for a great deal of many of years, but has also become a requirement from our emergency preparedness, is a mobile command center. This is a great opportunity to understand that development charges, and working with Mike and Brian, have been able to afford us a 75% impact, meaning $562,000 of the projected $750,000 cost can be dealt with and paid for and supplied by development charges. Therefore, that impact is $187,000. If we're here, we have Ryan, Paul, and John. Thank you for your indulgence, and we're open for any questions.
Thank you, sir. And I do have a speakers list now. I'm going to have just 1 second. I had Councillor Clark.
Thank you. And thank you for that presentation, Chief. I appreciate that. Madam Deputy Mayor, I wonder if the Chief could address whether or not the reserves are being used for this capital request for the City of Hamilton, the police reserves.
Thank you very much. And through the chair, let's just do a breakdown of what our reserves and the categories that they have. We have a tax stabilization reserve, and in that particular area, we have just under $2 million. We have a police vehicle replacement. Right now, although our report as of October 31st, 2021 would indicate that we have over $5.6 million. The reality is that we will actually have an offset of $3 million on that. And in fact, our last month submission to our board was to already start a $1.9 million impact in 2022. So very quickly, you'll see in that reserve that we will cycle back to being, again, not in peril, but just having a balance of just approximately 1.3 million left in order for us to prepare for future pressures. One thing that we can look at to Councillor Clark's specific request is our actual mobile command center. We do have the potential that we will bring to our budget subcommittee, which will meet on December 1st. And we will be looking at alternative structure and the capital impact, and perhaps looking at the police vehicle replacement as one avenue in order to offset that capital. But we're a little bit premature for us to commit to that now. We have police capital expenses, and that sits at $1.7 million. We have the vacation liability reserve, and that sits at $1.6 million. These are liabilities, though, that we have to have in the bank, because the reality is if people were to exercise their options and their contractual obligations, we would have to make sure that we have flush ability to pay for them. The one area where we do have an absolute exposure of liability is our sick leave police payout. Our sick leave payout right now is woefully underfunded, in fact, to the tune of $13 million. Currently sitting at $7.1 million, we have a market evaluation liability, which is $21 to $22 million should everybody exercise their option of a sick leave payout. Rewards and police boards and how we actually function of just auction accounts and being able to offset day-to-day function of our board is at $189,000. And our OMERS, which again is our obligation in order to have the surplus monies there within our reserves in order to pay and to distribute those to who retire, was at $613,000. We will make these available as required, and we do speak through our budget subcommittee that in fact all of these numbers are available to them. Similarly, since 2012, we have in fact been able to post and provide this committee with what is our historic budget and actual results of our operating and capital, and that is current as of 2020 in your reservoir.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I appreciate the Chief's comprehensive explanation. Deputy Mayor, is it possible that, and I'm not meddling in police budgeting, but I think it would be helpful to this council and to the general public if we had a brief information report that outlines what the Chief has just said, because clearly there are some reserves that are a requirement and that are needed, and just try to understand where the reserves are going to be used in this budget process and what reserves are like on a go-forward basis for the police. Is that a possibility? Again, not trying to interfere with police direction.
Chief, please.
Thank you very much. We certainly can assist you. We will go through our board and we will again bring this to our budget subcommittee. We will be going to actually our board on the 16th of December to be presenting our initial budget. And that budget, as you know, will then come to council in early 2022. I can't help but refer back to the slide deck that Mr. Zagaric presented on slide deck number 32. Capital reserves regarding 2022 funded projects. Currently, there is $9.4 million with regards to emergency vehicles and fire apparatus. We do not have that a luxury as being a board set aside from that fund. We have to have our own reserves in order to make sure that we can actually put a fleet out there. With supply chain management, we currently, right now, are also not in receipt of our 2021 vehicle fleet. So we are actually deferring the rollout of, in fact, our life cycle and our improvement of our emergency response vehicles.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor, my questions are really for my personal comprehension, and I think the general public's comprehension. A lot of talk about why aren't they using reserves? We need to understand exactly where the reserves are, and that helps to educate the public. I appreciate that. And thank you, Chief, through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And I appreciate the time, Deputy Mayor.
Always good questions. Councillor Clark, thank you for that. And Chief, just respectfully, you'll circulate that to all of the councillors.
I will assist that, and I'll work with John, Ryan, and Paul, and make sure that through our budget subcommittee, we are participating in making sure that full knowledge and exposure and transparency of what we have is there for you.
Thank you, sir. Speakers list now, I have Councillor Ferguson that will be followed by the mayor and then Councillor Wilson. Councillor Ferguson?
Yes, Madam Chairman, the chief did answer my question during his presentation. I appreciate that. I noticed though that the mobile command center is back on the list and has been there for a long while. I was just curious, do you have to hand crank that engine?
If you're talking about the current one that we are using right now, we have in fact had conversations through the chair. That's a 1990s command vehicle. In fact, even at the U.S. Open and stuff, it in fact was more dangerous to be in it than it was out during the torrential rainfall. We have also made a conscious decision that we are no longer putting good money to bad. We have stopped actually supplying the ability to bring air conditioning into it, etc. This is actually a requirement through emergency preparedness. We are being as prudent as we can with the dollars. That's why we have attached it to the development charges. And we are very encouraged that the city can assist us in 75% of that. So already in our capital, we have the offset of $560,000 on what potentially is a $750,000 item.
Yeah, putting humor aside, it is long overdue. I remember during my time on the board, it was always come up and pushed aside. And I remember that command post at the Canadian Open and being in it a few times. And it is a 1990s vintage then, is it, Chief?
That's correct. Ideally, it was a good purchase at the time, but it's nothing other than a camper. And the reality is we have requirements, the actual spanning control of the type of work we are doing, the requirements for us with missing persons, with us in major investigations throughout our community do require us to have on-site presence, as well as what we've seen in large demonstrations, and also acutely aware of when we are dealing with fake homecomings and other major events. Right now, with what we're going to be having with Grey Cup, what we're looking already now in January with the international soccer, these are requirements where we need to have the ability of mobility with a command post and be on site in order to use our deployment correctly.
No, long overdue. I just want to thank you, the senior command, and all the officers and the civilians for the great work they're doing for the city of Hamilton. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Mayor, sir.
I think I'm a holdover from the previous list, but always happy to speak, but I'll defer to Councillor Wilson. I know she has questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Wilson.
I just put a note in the chat, Chair Pearson. My question has been asked. Thank you.
Wonderful. So with that, then,
Let me put myself back on the list then, now that I've deferred, and just say, pleased to to have appointed Pat Mandy to chair of the board yesterday. I think she's going to be a great contributor, has been a great contributor to the board. And as council has identified Judy Partridge as being the new appointee from the city of Hamilton. I think the board and the leadership at Hamilton Police Services is in very good hands indeed. And I couldn't be happier with all the work that's being done by all the staff there. So I just wanted to say thank you, Chief, and everyone else that's been working so hard to keep our community safe. And a special thank you for the lives that were saved yesterday at the encampment, which I thought was a very hazardous, dangerous, and an unfortunate circumstance. And we could have lost a number of lives were it not for the good effort of our police going in there and pulling people out of either burning tents or tents that are about to be inflamed. So thank you for that effort. And I know MLE and a lot of other city staff were on site to provide wraparound services for all of the encampment residents. And certainly, the policing, matter was more involved with the activists than it was with the encampment individuals, who were quite helpful, quite appreciative, quite cooperative, and most of which have been housed. So, you know what, we cannot thank our police for that life-saving effort yesterday at this Beamer Park encampment. That's it for me, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, everyone, I'm going to ask first that we receive the presentations moved by Mr. Mayor, Stephanie, sorry.
There are no formal presentations to be received.
Okay, so I don't have to do that. Thank you. I
Nope.
just didn't, that's fine. Then I'm going to ask then, it was suggested there be a deferral of this, of these reports to December 2nd meeting. And can I have a mover and a seconder, please, to put that vote on the floor? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Mr. Mayor. Thank you. So with that, electronic vote, please. And while that's being brought up, thank you, Chief and all staff present today. Appreciate the information.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. That vote carries 11-0.
And thank you. I'm just going through the rest, be sure I don't miss anything, but Madam Clerk will certainly catch me. Are there any notices of motion today? Seeing none, and this has to be related directly to the budget, so I see none. Then I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder to adjourn.
Madam Chair, can I just very quickly,
Thank you, Councillor Farr, go ahead.
can we go to Craig Murdoch? I think everyone will appreciate this. We just received word during today's meeting that we received the Brownie Award for the $140 million remediation of Randall Reef, and I think it's worth putting it on the public record, and he can size it up best and briefly. Significant born in Hamilton initiative.
Thank you. If Mr. Murdoch is available to be virtual with us. Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, Craig. Can you just give us that news update?
Sorry, my microphone wasn't in place. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we have some very good news that Hamilton, along with all of our partners in the province, are recipients of a Brownie Award for the Randall Reef contamination containment. So the award was received earlier this week by our provincial partners, and this is for significant improvement to water quality or the environment, as has been outlined in the email. So we wanted to make sure that we let all of council know of this significant achievement, because this was a major project undertaken by the City of Hamilton and our partners that also includes Halton. And we just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware and that the project is nearing completion and will be an excellent example of a reusable space that has an environmental positive impact.
Thank you for that. Councillor Farr, did you wish for comment?
Just to stick with the theme, it was an initiative that began with a conversation with this council, a really talented city staffer that brought all the partners together, multi-million-dollar partners from all levels. One individual who did an amazing job there. So from a budgetary standpoint and to close, I'm sure either Craig or Mike or someone from finance can recall what investment we started the ball rolling on here municipally to get people like Halton, Burlington, the province, the feds, and everyone else at the table. Do we remember the initial investment by the City of Hamilton for this Born in Hamilton initiative? And that's it. I just wanted to pass it along. It's very significant. It's probably one of the most significant in Canadian history in terms of remediated cleanup.
Councillor Powers, do you have
Do we remember do we remember the initial local investment towards this? Anybody? Through you, Chair. Yeah. And thank you.
I saw Councillor Powers had his hand up. I'm not sure if he has that answer.
No, I don't have the answer, but my recollection in another life as an MP back in 2005, it was the initiative of our local caucus with the City of Hamilton and the City of Burlington and the feds to invest in that. So it dates back prior to 2005. At that point, we actually made the decision to start the movement. Back in 2019, as I finished my term as the co-chair of the Water Quality Board of the International Joint Commission for the Great Lakes, we met here in Hamilton and we toured the site. And I must tell you that my colleagues from both Canada and the United States were very, very impressed with the cooperation and the action that was taking place on that remedial resurrection down at the harbor. As you know, the Hamilton Harbor still is on the list of hotspots, and this will go a long way in heading towards either minimizing our recognition as a hotspot and eventually eliminating it from that international list. So thanks to all involved.
Thank you. So maybe staff could refresh us in response to that email that I haven't seen it, but has gone out as far as the history and the dollars. But I believe also Stelco contributed some monies to that as well. So
Actually, Stelco contributed steel or the dollars for the steel that actually became the encasing. And lion's share came from the federal government, I have to admit, but I think Craig Murdoch will probably have a numbers breakdown for it.
I don't know why I'm thinking 30 million, but
That's in my head as well. For
yeah.
Hamilton.
So that, yeah, exactly for Hamilton. So
I had
we'll certainly see what comes back as staff can provide us historical.
Greg's on the call here. He could probably give us an immediate answer.
You have it, Craig?
Thank you for your faith in me, Mayor Eisenberger, but I don't have that number readily available. But I will commit to getting you that number today, and I will send it out as a follow-up email.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. And just a reminder, we did have a bit of the presentation of that work at the rate budget last week, and it was great news. So, and it is actually a great initiative of a reuse of an area that could never have been used until this was done. So super. With that, I'm going to ask again, any notices of motions related directly to the budget today? Seeing none, may I have a mover and a second of them to please adjourn. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Brenda Johnson. Electronic vote before everyone goes. Have a weekend, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. And I think this completes my tour of Deputy Mayor. So thank you, everyone, for being great to follow through on everything as I sat in the chair this month. Take care, stay safe. Bye now.